Before I begin, I would be remiss in thanking a lot of individuals and organizations that have helped us throughout this process. The Institute of International Studies, led by Professor Chibber, for his constant support and mentorship. Administrative Director Rexel, Deputy Program Manager Elliot, alumnus Harsh Shah, and Professor Sudha Shetty for guiding and supporting us with the organization of this conference. Professor Pranab Bardhan for being a constant source of academic inspiration for all our panels. A special shout out to our sponsors, Terzero General Trading and Aventus Capital, along with our partners, the Government of India, the United States-India Strategic Partnership Forum, the Global and Executive Programs at the Goldman School of Public Policy, the Institute of South Asian Studies, and Ashoka University. Yes, I know, that was a long, long list, and I couldn't be more grateful to all of them. I'm quite sure Mr. Jaitley, our keynote speaker, is waiting to talk to all of you immediately, and I don't want to be a hurdle in that process at all. So let me introduce to you our two moderators for the opening keynote in the morning, Professor Pradeep Chibber and Akash Palotia. Professor Pradeep Chibber is a professor of political science at UC Berkeley and also our mentor for this conference. He serves as the Indo-American Community Chair of India Studies and the Director of the Institute of International Studies. He researches the politics of India, political parties, and party systems. In fact, some of you might remember him as the moderator for when the Congress Party Vice President Rahul Gandhi came to speak at UC Berkeley a month ago. Akash, who is a third-year student studying computer science and economics, also happens to be my roommate. This means that I can tell you how many times he nerds me out about his interest in the Indian economy and the general political process. The conference today is reflective of his dedication, his work reflective of his passion, and his knowledge reflective of me being his roommate. Jokes aside, let me introduce to you one of the founders and the chairs of the Berkeley India Conference, Akash Palotia.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Harshal. I can't believe that this is finally happening. 9 months ago, this was nothing but something just out of passion. But now, it's numerous nights of discussion, hard work, as well as thought. I hope we can live up to your expectations and have an incredible 2 days of discussion and debate. Before I move on and introduce our keynote speaker, I request all of you to please know that when we open the floor to questions by the audience, you would only be allowed to ask a one-part question, which is a maximum of 2 sentences long. And please ask a question and not make a statement. This is in the best interest for all of us and helps us ensure that the intellectual standards for the session remain high. Moving on, I would now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Arun Jaitley. Mr. Jaitley, currently Union Minister of Finance and Corporate Affairs of India, is a distinguished lawyer and prominent leader of the Bharatiya Janata Party. He's also the leader of the upper house in the Indian Parliament, the Rajya Sabha. In his prolific career as a lawyer and as a political leader, he has held many important positions and made many significant contributions in the areas of economic liberalization, judicial reforms, electoral reforms, and progressive social and economic legislations. Our conference is extremely fortunate to have a speaker of Mr. Jaitley's stature with us. I will now ask Mr. Jaitley to go ahead and please deliver the keynote address.
Well, thank you very much, Akash and Professor Chibber, for having invited me to speak at the Berkeley India Conclave. It's my bad luck that I'm not there in person, because I would have otherwise loved to interact with the audience more directly. Well, India as it stands today, some obvious facts which are known to all, its diversity, its size, the fact that there's a very large population, the fact that we have one section of population which is still living in very hostile circumstances, and yet you have a population which is quite aspirational, also becoming a lot impatient and wants changes and improvements to take place in India at a very fast pace itself. And therefore, keeping all these challenges in mind, when you look at an aspirational nation and an aspirational population, I think the obvious challenge for the country is to grow and grow fast. It has to grow at a much higher rate than we've been growing in recent history. And obviously, the benefits of that growth also must reach that segment of the population which has till date been the least serviced one. Obviously, you need a lot of resource for this purpose. As your growth increases, your resource from the state increases, and your public investment itself increases. India has also made a very conscious effort consistently to attract a lot of foreign direct investment. In fact, we are one of the largest recipients in recent history of foreign direct investment. India has transformed out of a more conservative mindset and is now getting tuned to getting integrated globally much more than it was in the past. And therefore, our policies with regard to technologies, our policies with regard to investment getting into India are much broader than what they have been in the past. Procedural problems also and challenges which remained in this have been to a large extent removed itself. I think India had two important stigmas consistently attached to it. It was conventionally a far more difficult place to do business in. Our procedures were long-winded, our decision-making used to take a very long time. I think that situation has substantially improved for the better. I'm not merely relying on the rankings as far as the world is concerned, but one can easily see at two levels. The central government has started moving much faster, and most state governments are now competing with each other in order to ensure that the benefits of investment and growth come to those states itself. In fact, as winter sets in over the next few weeks, I'll find myself busy almost going to every state in the country, because every state now holds investor conferences irrespective of its political complexion, wanting to attract a large number of investors into the country itself. The other stigma, I think, was one of corruption itself, because that itself makes doing business more difficult. And I think our institutional mechanisms have become much stronger. Governments and administrations have learned an important lesson. Accountability mechanisms have become more powerful. Media and public opinion has become far more alert. As a result of which, I think political corruption itself in India has substantially come down. In fact, one can see a noticeable change having taken place in Delhi. And one of the significant factors which has impacted in bringing about that change is that governments have also realized that discretions tend to promote abuse and therefore tend to lead governments into far greater trouble. And therefore, rather than allow decisions to be impacted, such as allocation of resources, merely by discretions, they've allowed a much bigger market mechanism itself to take effect. I think one of the important changes that has taken place in India, that today you have both a very powerful federal concept with states now, as I said, competing with each other, becoming far more aspirational, and the kind of devolution of resources which has gone to the states itself is far more. And therefore the states financially are far better, and therefore their poverty alleviation programs, their infrastructure creation programs have become far stronger itself. I think few challenges which remain, on which a lot of work has taken place in the last couple of years. Direct taxes, I think, had to become more reasonable, more rational. I've already announced a roadmap that we are slowly trying to bring the corporate tax even down to about 25%, getting rid of all the exemptions, trying to ensure to the largest extent possible that India becomes a far more compliant society, as also India becomes a society where the interaction between the tax official and the assessee itself goes down, and it's more technology enabled rather than being in person itself. The use of technology in governance particularly the Aadhaar, the UID mechanism, I think is something which is peculiar to India. It's helped us considerably. It's helped us in making sure that the state support, whether it's the state governments or the central government or the local bodies, reaches directly the bank accounts, and therefore our programs of financial inclusion, transfer of direct cash into those in terms of support, which is a work in progress itself, has been has made quite an impressive beginning, at least in the last few years. The institutional mechanism of the monetary policy itself, now you have a statutory monetary policy a committee, which and the target also is statutorily fixed itself. It's in the initial stages, and I do hope this is an experiment that works well. We've had some initiatives which we've taken in the indirect tax field. We've spent the last 3 months now having the GST in action. I think it's been a reasonable, smooth transformation. Several prints got thrown up in the first 3 months. We are trying to make sure that wherever we see some challenges or problems and there is a scope for improvement, we are trying to bring in those necessary scopes. I think in the GST Council, we've succeeded in creating actually India's first federal institution, which takes a decision. These are early days, the transition phase is on, but I have no doubt with the way the transition itself has rolled itself out, it's going to be a far more successful experience, which will plug a lot of holes into India's taxation system itself. On infrastructure, I think that is where a lot of investment, particularly public investment and public-private partnership has to go, has to take place. And therefore, on the front of national highways, on power sector, airports, seaports, these are several areas we seem to do well. Railways, we probably can do much better, and I do hope we see a lot more improvement in Indian railways becoming world-class in the next few days, the next few months and years. As far as rural India is concerned, that's where the real poverty is. That's where I think we need to really create a more enabling environment. And therefore, the targets which the state, along with the central government and the state governments have set for themselves to make sure that each village has a road connectivity, to make sure that there is a Paka housing available with all people living in villages, the sanitation program, which has been going on at a reasonably fast pace, the fact that every village must have electrification, and now an improved target that not only every village but every home in every village must have must be electrified itself. I think these are all transformational changes which are intended to take place. How do I see the next few years, and what do I see as the problem? I think my own experience is that in India, decision-making, particularly with regard to reforms and the cost that India has undertaken, has fairly stabilized. There is a considerable amount of public support behind this, and therefore governments of the day, whether in the center or the states, will probably move in that direction. My other hope is that government revenues and government spendings will always continue to increase, particularly in infrastructure, as also in the social sector expenditures. As far as foreign direct investment is concerned, with the kind of liberalized approach we have, coupled with the fact that investments in India have proved to be reasonably return-worthy in that sense, I see them increasing. But I also do see a challenge where private investment in India, for some obvious reason that people had expanded beyond capacities and the banks were plagued with a very high level of NPAs, which is a problem which we are presently trying to address. And I think that requires to be addressed at a very fast pace itself. I do hope India is able to retain its growth levels once again and live up to the aspirations of its people, because we must not forget we not only have a very large population to service, we have a very young population to service, and in that young population there is a section which so far has been underserviced but is also increasingly becoming more and more aspirational. Time, therefore, is running against us. And I think over the next 1 or 2 decades, India from a developing economy really has to take the challenge of moving into a higher income group country, and we have to do it at a much faster pace. Thank you. I'll leave the rest of the time available for the session for any interaction if possible.
Thank you for this speech, Mr. Jaitley. So I would just like to set the ball rolling and go ahead and ask my first question, where your government has taken a lot of bold and transformational initiatives such as demonetization, GST, campaigns like the Swachh Bharat. However, some experts and some indicators show that these steps have not led to any significant changes on the ground. Would you say that these are more long-term benefits and the country would have to wait to reap those? And is there any way to sort of, mitigate the short-term problems faced by this country?
Well, I don't think people have looked at it really very closely. Now, let us take a campaign like the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. The Swachh Bharat Abhiyan for the first time brought to fore the importance of sanitation. You have hundreds and hundreds of companies which have started spending their CSR expenditure on building toilets. You have states after states on the strength of public investment today saying that my state or my district is now becoming a defecation-free district. And therefore, India is well set on a target today where in terms of sanitation and cleanliness, I think there is a sizable progress which is being made. For the first time in Indian history, this agenda itself has become a center stage agenda and is moving forward. Now to have about 4.5-5 crore, which is about literally 50 million odd toilets being constructed in a short period of time, and that is the roadmap as far as the Swachh Bharat is concerned. It's both having a short-term impact, it's having a long-term impact. Today you have all schools, particularly schools where girls study, which have been provided with toilets. You have their houses which are being provided with toilets. And therefore, I think this has become a movement far beyond a governmental program. It's become a mass movement. Now let us look at the second example you gave. You gave the example of demonetization. The Indian normal was to live with a high cash economy, not paying taxes. You buy a property, you transact partly in cash. You do business, you maintain 2 sets of account books. Now, how can a country which claims to be the fastest growing major economy in the world, which aspires to grow from a developing into a developed economy, continue with a normal of this kind? And therefore, you need to shake this system in order to reduce the quantum of cash in India, and therefore obviously make it a more tax compliant society. The curse of cash itself involves several challenges. It leads to corruption, it leads to several other problems. Now let us see, even for those who say that there is no short-term advantage. Has the number of taxpayers in India increased immediately in a matter of months? The truth is it has. Has the digitization transactions increased? From 70 crores, it went up to 140 crores. Today, it's at about 130 crores. It almost doubled. Now, you've seen the immediate advantage as far as these issues are concerned. You've seen in Chhattisgarh and in Jammu and Kashmir, where you had insurgent and terror activities, the funding of the terrorists itself getting squeezed. You'll have terrorism incidents, but the fact that you were finding 5,000 and 8,000 and 10,000 stone throwers being provided with money by the terrorist organizations and the crowds of stone throwers getting together, why is it in the last 8-10 months that has not happened? And therefore, I think a more serious analysis will show that even within a matter of months, there is a short-term. It may have a short-term adverse impact on GDP for a quarter or two, but I think the direction as far as demonetization is concerned, to bring tax compliances, to squeeze the quantum of cash in India, I think it's having a desired impact. At least it's again become an agenda issue. Now, we've been 3 months into the GST itself. And in 3 months, you've had all the road tolls, all the checkpoints in the states disappeared. You have a clear flow of goods and services which has started all over the country. You have now people, some of them very reluctantly so, every large company in India which supplies to its distributors now gives you a list and the GST and number of its distributor. The distributor has to give off its retailers, and slowly the whole chain is becoming. Today you are at a registration stage where you have far many people, including small traders, registering themselves. Now there was a problem with them in relation to a compliance burden. The GST Council looked at it. We reduced the compliance burden yesterday and brought down the compliance burden as they were there. There was a challenge relating to exporters. We brought it down. But in terms of tax collections, the whole process going online, the possibility of evasion coming down, and once I can tell you, the e-way bill mechanism takes over, the tendency of some to still continuing to have the whole chain operate in cash itself will suffer a setback.
Mr. Jaitley, good evening to you. This is Shail Kumar. I have a question. You mentioned at the end, India is a very large nation that's really young. This young population is aspirational. I think education, as we all understand, we are actually at Berkeley, is the key enabler for this young population. I would love to understand how you think about education. What priority does it have within the government, and what sort of opportunities and challenges you see in the plans that government has to address them? Thank you.
Well, I think normally there is a criticism made of the governments with regard to the quantum of expenditure that we put in, the states put into the expenditure itself. Now, of course, part of the criticism I concede is a legitimate one, because it also depends on the quantum of resource which is available to a state. There are a lot of commitments of interest payments, of national security, and others, the government wanting to service themselves because of employees, pensions, and so on, which are expenditures you can't help, and therefore it's a challenge to maintain your fiscal balances. And therefore, please remember that as far as education is concerned in India, expenditures are taking place at the level of the central government, the state governments, and even at the third tier of the government. The local bodies also get involved in this. Now, the number of institutions has increased, and over the last 2 to 3 decades, the participation of private sector institutions also in India has built up in a huge manner. And therefore, I think we could always spend more. We could always improve upon the quality of those institutions. But at the same time, it's an area which is today expanding. The literacy rates are going up. The standards of many of the institutions have been going up. And therefore, in most areas, we've actually acquired even surplus capacities. There's, of course, a need for improvement of quality in those areas. And I think it's significant. The second, of course, is with a large population like this, instead of the formal degrees, you needed to skill your people. And therefore, one of the emphasis now has been in different vocations itself, and there are dozens of such vocations in which you have to have those skilling centers which have been established. We can always do better than that, and to skill people so that for a large number of jobs where you require a substantial amount of skilling, you have a labor force or a workforce which is ready for that particular purpose.
So this is Venkatesh Shukla, and you talked about, you highlighted some of the transformational initiatives that your government has taken. And in my mind, the most transformational initiative that the government has taken is recognizing that it's the startups that create jobs and it's the startups that create wealth in the society. So, and your government is the first government since independence to recognize that and to promote that. So I applaud you for that. I was involved with Startup India, helping come up with that policy. And my frustration was that there are a couple of things that we wanted did not make it. India is the only country in the world that taxes angel investment, not income. The only country in the world. And it continues on the books. And the only exception was if you are an approved startup. And some committee of bureaucrats decides which startup should get the approval or not. Now, these are the people who have never created a single job in their life. They can't tell a startup from the other, and they sit in judgment on which is an approved startup or not. And no surprise that last year there were 20,000 startups in India, but only one got approved. And then there's a discriminatory tax treatment on angel investment anyway. If you make money in stock market, in a year, there's no capital gains. If you make money in a startup, which is highly risky, you pay capital gains. So, I mean, this is a Startup India is a very, very powerful initiative. I'd like to get your perspective on why some of these hangovers from the past are allowed to linger.
Well, I can only tell you this. 2 years ago, when the startup campaign itself was highlighted by the conference which was held in New Delhi and addressed by the Prime Minister, the persons involved in the startup projects itself had suggested some areas where they wanted governmental initiative in revenue matters itself. And some taxation initiatives were announced in a speech by the Prime Minister in that meeting. Now, they were the ones which were implemented. Now, if there is a scope for more, I'm willing to look at it, but please remember, we always have at this stage a very delicate task of balancing our budgets. So even in relation to the capital markets which you mentioned, which were beyond taxation or areas covered by double taxation treaties where we'd given a lot of relief in the past, slowly I've been withdrawing some of them. And in the withdrawal process, we made some changes. But that obviously can't give satisfaction to the startup industry. I think it's an industry we want to encourage, because across the world, particularly in the geographical area where you are located at the moment, the Indian community has made its mark in this area. And I think in India, our own experience has been that these are people who go on a track which has not been discovered in the past. The success rate is always unpredictable, and therefore you have to leave these people alone to find out a road for themselves. And given whenever I do have the comfort in terms of revenue, I'm quite willing to look at any suggestion if you make them.
So I'll urge you to look into that, because there's a tremendous anger in the angel investor community in India.
Thank you. $10.55.
Hi, so there's a perception that the liberalization and reform of the economy that you were talking about often leaves out or neglects the agricultural sector. And sort of this was visible in the nationwide farmer protests that took place, but also like in the fact that farmer suicide rates remain very high despite all this other reform taking place. What could you say about that?
Well, I think I'll paraphrase your question a little differently, because whereas in the context of economic policy, liberalization, emphasis on infrastructure and various areas, it's quite possible with regard to your investment or your revenue or taxes policy to liberalize yourself. In relation to the farm sector, I think the problem is not one of liberalizing. The problem really is the farmer just doesn't get enough for his produce, and therefore his condition in the country remains precarious. He becomes, he gets involved in a debt trap. That is, his cost of production is very high, and if there is a drought or if there is an overproduction by virtue of which his prices collapse, he doesn't get the right market price, and therefore when he doesn't get the right market price, his debt trap increases, and therefore that leads him to the extreme step itself. I think that's a challenge, and therefore we are still resorting to an area where we need to provide external help as far as the farm sector is concerned. So some states do it by way of subsidy, some do by doing, we for instance give the farmer interest at cheaper loans, we bear a part of the interest cost itself. Electricity to him is given at a more competitive prices, and that is why this effort is being made to improve rural infrastructure, to give him a higher price as far as procurement is concerned, and there you have to balance between his price and also the impact on the consumer in terms of inflation. So the challenge is a little different, and I think it's important for us to get our farmers to produce the right stuff also. You can't overproduce some items by which it leads to the collapse of the market itself. And therefore, I think that's a slightly different challenge that we have. Irrigation is one important area because the moment you depend on nature, your productivity gets impacted depending on the variation of the monsoon season that year.
Hi, my name is Bhumi Purohit. I wanted to ask about what transformations are a priority within the government. So the government has made a lot of digitization and transformations outside of it, but the internal finance systems are still very old, which causes a lot of delays for payments to vendors and beneficiaries, which causes a lot of corruption within the bureaucracy in the system as funds move from one level to another. So what is the scope of improvement in digitizing that process inside of the government?
Well, I think it's not as bad as you make it sound that there is no digitization taking place within the government itself. I think you are right to the extent that we still have the old system of those bulky files operating and people making notes on those files, etc. But a lot of it has become digital. The accounts have substantially become digital. And I do hope one day we start finding that the paper gets replaced on the files also. That doesn't seem to be happening at the moment, but I think that's inevitably the next step which will take place in future.
Mr. Finance Minister, in your remarks you highlighted the importance of growth, of economic growth and growing rapidly in a short period of time. To meet the aspirations of youth in India who are dreaming of a better future for themselves. But I'm sure you would agree that it's not just economic growth, but rather the distribution of income that's important in a country like India. And we know that using consumption data, that the Gini index of inequality for India doesn't look very bad, but when we use income data, right? Income inequality has literally exploded in India in the last few decades. There's a new paper out that talks about how the concentration of wealth in India right now actually exceeds that of the British Raj when we were colonized. As you're well aware, using employment growth as a way to deal with inequality, can be sort of one way out of this problem. But we also know that employment growth has been extremely lackluster. So what is your government's position on this problem of skyrocketing inequality and the lack of employment growth? And what does the government intend to do about it in terms of policies? Thank you.
Well, I think your point with regard to inequalities continuing in India is something that can never be contested or denied. It's obviously there. And over the decade, you could see it. You could see the difference between the quality of urban life and the quality of a life in an urban slum. You could see the difference between a quality of a village life in India. And I think, therefore, it's extremely important to deal with it at two levels. One, of course, is a solution which you suggested. As the economy expands, it has to create jobs, and therefore the jobs in India have been created more by the informal sectors. The SMEs have created much more, the micro enterprises have created much more than the structured large industries itself. And I think one area where we are lacking, where we need to speed up investment, and that's where the banking NPAs also hit the investment in those areas, is to feed these sectors with the maximum amount of credit, because they are the real job creators as far as India is concerned. The second, of course, I indicated in an answer to an earlier question, skilling and educating the people. And the third, of course, I think the inadequate areas of India need a far greater investment. And therefore, the resource which has to increase as far as the state is concerned, and that is something which we have been trying to expand the size of the formal economy, tried to reduce as far as the shadow economy is concerned, is to increase that big formal economy so that the resource available with the state, and it's only the state which is going to improve what I indicated in my opening comment, the state of the Indian villages. Today we are at a stage where we have to provide them at least the first basics itself. We are looking at the roads, we are looking at sanitation, we are looking at housing, we are looking at electricity.
Hi, Mr. Jaitley. This is Dhaval Shah. I'm an alumni at HAS, Berkeley MBA. I had a comment and a question then. Okay, so I'm sorry. So the question is about the strategy for incubators and accelerators in India. From your point of view, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think partly to allow entrepreneurs a free hand for inventions, to allow people who can create new ideas, who can convert those new ideas into wealth generation and create a facilitatory environment for them. You already have a fund available, you have the banks which are trying to facilitate some of them, and I think these are the ones who really help in accelerating the whole growth process as far as the country is concerned. And I think these will not emerge necessarily out of the large structured industry, and therefore one of our objects which we are endeavoring to do is to feed a very large section of Indian people at the small and the mid-level industries itself, so that they are in a position to generate and activate the economy at that level.
Good evening, Mr. Jaitley. My name is Christopher Flores. I'm an IIT and Berkeley alumni in the technology sector. One of the things I noticed on my visits to India, which has degraded over the last 2 or 3 decades, is the environment. So what I'd like to hear from you is what steps the government is taking, concrete measures to sort of improve the environmental situation in India.
Well, I think we have established already the institutional mechanisms which have been making the directions and enforcing at times even hard measures at the time of stopping a certain section of industries. These are harsh measures, but that's been happening in India. There's an institutional mechanism in place. You have a very tough and a strict regulatory mechanism in the government. In the course of industrialization, if you go through the process of setting up any developmental project or any industry. 3, even our taxation policies, if you see, we are, despite a large coal reserve, we are taxing carbon at various levels. We have a cess as far as coal is concerned. We have a tax as far as fuel is concerned. In fact, it's not a very popular tax within the country itself. But the extent to which we tax carbon would probably be more than any other country in the world. And therefore, the government of India has been now in the forefront of having accepted a responsibility that, notwithstanding our own developmental requirements, our commitment to protection of the environment would remain.
Mr. Jaitley, so there have been a lot of talks about Congress party not being a strong enough opposition, and I would like to hear what your views are. as what your views are on Congress party being as opposition?
Well, my views on the subject would obviously be based on my own perception and my own position. I think the main challenge before the Congress party is twofold. The first being that historically and conventionally the Congress occupied the center space in Indian politics. They consistently did it through decades, and that is how they were the natural party of governance. In the last few days, I have seen, in the last few years, in fact, if I may say so, this process started somewhere in 2004 with the establishment of that National Advisory Council and has continued. And today I find the position that they take on most issues is not the conventional Congress party centrist positions. There are ideological agendas which get dictated by the ultra-left, and they end up being merely the cheerleaders as far as that is concerned. The second, I think, the party's whole process of leadership creation within the party based on talent and potential and qualities of an individual, I think doesn't just gel with the rest of aspirational India. Aspirational India tests its leaders very harshly. It is willing to impose a very tough criteria on who has the leadership potential itself. It is no longer in a mood that it's only going to accept family names or other such marks in order to decide who's a better leader and who's fit enough to lead so. So unless it can go back to being a more structured party, which selects its leaders on the basis of its own caliber and potential, and goes back to its original centrist position, I don't think it will be able to substantially expand its position.
So this can be the last question of the day. So, investors do not like political uncertainty and social tensions. Do you think that the increasing social tensions in India are causing you, as a finance minister, a problem to handle the Indian economy, and especially like things like not having enough jobs? Are they contributing to the social tensions?
I don't think your analysis about the existence of social tensions is very correct. You see, India has seen in the past a whole legacy of social tensions. You've seen religious tensions, you've seen caste tensions, and I think we are passing through a phase where India is gradually emerging out of it. What happens is some stray incidents, unfortunate and condemnable, but stray incidents take place even in the United States. And I can assure you that they take place more in the United States than they take place in India. It's just that the propagandists in India have a greater voice in trying to proclaim them all over the world. India that way is a far more peaceful place, and therefore I think a right place to do business in.
Thank you so much for your time. We were really glad to have you and speak with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess it's back to me now. We're gonna take like a few, like around 5 minutes to just set up, so you can you can talk around and have conversations as you were having before this. We'll set our panels and I'll introduce our moderator after that.